was the showdown that wasn't.
We don't have a majority in the Legislative Council. We will, as we always do, engage, and I'm confident that we'll get an outcome.
Having pledged to return to Parliament to scuttle the pandemic management bill, disgraced Labor MP turned crossbencher Adam Somyurek was a no-show.
Who knew that Parliament could be used for such exacting revenge on former colleagues?
The current state of emergency is set to expire on December 15.
We have worked very hard to get us to this point that Victoria could lead the nation with pandemic-specific legislation.
Meanwhile, New South Wales has quietly withdrawn legislation that would have expanded and extended emergency powers through to 2023.
I, like anyone, wants to make sure that we have government out of the way, but at the same time we've got to keep the protection, the health care of people right across our state.
As that announcement passed with barely a whimper, the situation in Victoria has deteriorated. One man has been charged for allegedly encouraging protesters to take firearms to state parliament and execute the Premier. Several other investigations are reportedly ongoing.
I'm sorry that you don't agree with us sometimes, but to threaten our lives and threaten our families' lives, that is going way too far, and it is not on.
After several state MPs appeared at the protests,
we have all had a gutful.
The opposition leader offered qualified condemnation.
No one endorses anyone associated with the hard right or the hard left in any way in these protests, certainly not me.
The PM walked a similar line.
Those threats and intimidation has no place in Australia. We're a civil, peaceful society. Of course, there are many people who are feeling frustrated.
Morrison also calling on Dan Andrews to further ease restrictions.
It's time for governments to step back and for Australians to be able to move forward with the freedoms that should be theirs.
Strangely, that comes as the state prepares for a major easing from midnight tonight.
We're working as hard as we possibly can to never again have to have a lockdown. The only reason we had lockdowns in this state is because we didn't have a vaccine. If you want to know why we didn't have a vaccine, then I would direct you, with the greatest of respect, to the person that you have just quoted. Any other issues?
But with the controversial bill still in play, could we see the anger escalate further?
I look forward to the day I get to see you dance on the end of a rope.
Dr. Deborah Smith is a political extremism researcher with Victoria University. She joins us now. Doctor, similar pandemic legislation has been tabled and withdrawn in New South Wales, but they don't seem to be having these violent protests like Victoria is. What are we accounting this difference?
So I think there's a couple of things in play here. So I think you can't sort of disconnect this from the fact that Victoria has experienced one of the longest lockdowns in the pandemic. People have felt very much like their freedoms have been curtailed. I also think there's some differences in Victoria and New South Wales. Victoria's always been seen as a more progressive state, and with that comes a fair bit of backlash. So we've seen more active far-right movements in Victoria, for example.
Well, there seems to be a range of motives and agendas at these protests. Some people I've seen interviewed and they seem reasonably concerned and quite reasonable people, and others are more on the violent spectrum. How much of this is actually about the pandemic bill?
Yes, I think the bill in itself has become, I guess, a little bit of a focus point or a rallying point for a whole lot of really diverse and often contradictory beliefs and grievances. So for some people, absolutely, the content of the bill will be, they'll have legitimate concerns over that and they'll want to express those. For other people, of course, they probably don't give a hoot about what's in the actual bill as much as they do about the fact that it provides another strategic opportunity. So I think there's a whole bunch of, legitimate and not so legitimate things going on around, and it's not helpful really to sort of try and put them all in the same bucket, but to understand that there are, different things going on here.
We are seeing a lot, or increasingly, very violent rhetoric around this, and it's been coming for the last week in particular. Death threats, charges have been laid now. Do you expect to see any actual violence come of this?
At the moment, what we're finding is an environment that actually really sort of celebrates and enables violence. And whilst I don't think we should expect to see an organised violent movement happening as a result of this. What we might see is somebody on the edge of the movement who then becomes more obsessed and fixated with this idea that there needs to be, they need to be on the vanguard of a movement and do some, very high-profile thing. But I also think that a lot of protective factors that normally exist in society are really stripped away. And as we return to a bit of normal, some elements of this will fade away and, disappear back.
At the same time, I kind of wonder whether or not now we've kind of seen an extreme element arrive in our politics that isn't going to go away, and long after we've even thought about COVID will still be there. What do you think?
Yeah, you're probably right. And I guess it all depends how you want to define extreme, because obviously it's a quite relative term. If you define it in violence, in terms of violence, then I think some of the violent rhetoric will actually, die down. But in terms of moving the overtone window is what's sort of permissible in terms of how we talk and the civility or lack of it in our democracy, I agree that that's probably here to stay, unfortunately.
Sounds like it's going to be a watch this space for a while yet. Deborah, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.